You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
We've spent a fair bit of time on the show in recent weeks talking about immigration. Now, this was something that came up when I sat down with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre for a year-end interview, which was, well, I guess, as the name would suggest, near the end of the year last year. And I was asking about immigration. And I said, listen, we have a housing crisis. You've talked about this. Here are the immigration numbers. Are those inflaming the housing crisis? And he basically said, well, yeah, you have to do the numbers. There are only so many houses being built. There are this many people coming into the country. But he would not commit to what his number would be. Although he said that when he forms government, if he forms government, his immigration target, which for the Liberals is 500,000 a year, but is truthfully higher than that when you take into account foreign students, temporary foreign workers, and so on, that the number would be tied to economic metrics. It would be tied to housing. It would be tied to labor force availability, and so on. Now, I think there is a bit of an issue when we only look at immigration on the narrow economic grounds. While these are important, it is not the totality of the immigration issue. There are issues to do with culture and integration. These were very controversially discussed in the 2015 election. But as a result, it's become this big no-go topic that no one is allowed to bring up. Well, if there are issues here, and we're going to take an honest, high-level view of immigration, can we have a grown-up conversation? Aaron Wudrick, who is the Domestic Policy Program Director for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, had a fantastic piece over at The Hub about this. Let's see if we can kick off this grown-up conversation. Aaron, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
Always a pleasure, Andrew.
So let me just first ask you why this gets so narrowly pigeonholed into being an economic issue when obviously immigration is going to be more complex than that.
I think it's because it's safe turf for people, right? If we're talking about economics, if we're talking about the obvious thing, which is that we have a housing problem and immigration as arithmetic, that I think is safe turf. I think it starts to get a little more uncomfortable for people when they're starting to imply that they're uncomfortable with large numbers of people who are not like them coming here. And look, I understand why this is a minefield. Some people can interpret this as just being hostile to people who aren't like you or racist. And there are people who are like that. But a lot of it also is just human nature, right? Like we are more comfortable around people like us who speak our language, who practice our religion, who have the same cultural tastes as we do. That's just human nature all around the world. And so I think it is fair to have a conversation, especially in a country like Canada, which has, as I make the argument in the piece, largely been built by immigration and fairly successfully at that. What is the rate of immigration that we're all comfortable with? That's optimal for Canada, that gives Canadians who are already here the most benefits, the newcomers the most benefits, and that ensures that we can all continue to get along. This is a problem that a lot of countries are struggling with, and Canada's no exception. But we need to have this conversation out in the open, because pretending that it doesn't matter and pretending that it's not creating any tension does not do us any favors.
I think there have been waves of this discussion, and I wouldn't say they've always been constructive or productive. I think post 9/11, certainly a lot of people were talking about the integration aspect of immigration. I think we're seeing another wave now. And in Canada, you see this on a number of fronts. I mean, you have ethnic tensions on the Khalistan Sikh separatism issue, especially out in some parts of British Columbia. You've got now the wave of anti-Semitism. And again, I'm not going to broadly, in broad strokes here, malign any individual group, but you have a lot of people that are immigrants from Arab or Muslim countries that have views on Israel that don't align with, I think, where a lot of Canadians are. And we see this in some of these protests. You have then on the other side, the gender ideology fights that were taking place in the fall, where you had some of those same people, Muslims, saying, well, hang on, my values don't align with these things. So no one can say there isn't a conversation there. But as we see, the longer you don't talk about it, the more hot it gets.
Yeah, and that's a problem. We have to recognize that when we talk, for example, about integration, right? About the idea that when you come to a country, you're kind of joining a national project, right? And nobody expects you to, you move to Canada and the next day suddenly you're pouring maple syrup on your cereal and you got the toque on. I mean, but what they do expect is that over time, you kind of, if not assimilate, which is a dirty word in a lot of quarters, integrate, sort of at least merge your past with our future together. I think most people think that's a reasonable compromise. And there's all kinds of things that impact how that happens. It's how many people from your home country are here when you get here. Are you able to live in Canada essentially amongst the community from your home country entirely? What is that impact does that have on your integration? Government, whether the government is signaling to you that there's an expectation that you're supposed to start to adopt or integrate Canadian ways, respect Canadian laws, Canadian values, or whether it's sort of, you know what, you come here and you can just do your own thing and you don't need to pay any attention to the national project. So there's a bunch of different factors at play here. But I think most Canadians, look, again, I think there are some who are just genuinely, if someone has a different skin color, they don't like them. I don't think that's most Canadians, though. I think most Canadians, it's what's more important to them is that people come here and they want to be Canadian. They want to feel Canadian. They want to live together with other Canadians rather than side by side. And I think I think that is the sort of general consensus that's really there. We just have to figure out, what's the right level of immigration that allows us to get there.
Yeah, and I would also say, even if someone views immigration purely as an economic calculation, if there's enough space and there are enough jobs and enough resources, I don't really care about anything else. Let's just accept that premise for a moment. There is a threshold that will exist for Canadians as how many is too many. And it's not to say that they're right or wrong, but it's that people are going to have their own threshold. And once you push above that, whatever it is, you start to have Canadians turn on immigration and turn on immigrants themselves, which I don't think anyone wants. And I mean, it's an unpleasant conversation because we can say, well, yep, Canadians shouldn't have an issue with it if there's enough space and there are enough jobs. Sure. But if they do, any government that overextends that is naturally going to, as you talk about in your piece, erode that consensus around it.
Yeah, and I think it's a sliding scale. And I think what's important is that, it's okay for some people to be uncomfortable with people that aren't like them. That doesn't necessarily make them racist. And I really, really like to reserve that term for people who sort of are very explicit in saying they think lesser of people who, have a different skin color, things like that. Just being more comfortable with people who speak your language or practice your religion or things like that. That's normal. I don't begrudge people that. And I think, I think we need to allow for that room. To me, the analogy to me, Andrew, is kind of like some people, they like to try different kinds of food all the time. That's just their personality. They find it interesting. They like the adventure. Other people know what they like to eat, right? And they want to stick with what they know. And it's just, maybe it's a handful of things. And there's nothing wrong with either of those. Those are just different personality types. And I think we need to be careful with Canadians when they express that preference, that we're not really and I think that's the reason we don't have this conversation a lot of the time, is people are afraid that if they even say something remotely, like, you know what, in my own town, sometimes I feel like there's no one like me, even though I was born in Canada. People are wary of being called racist for saying that, and I don't think that's fair to treat people that way.
Well, and even on the economic side alone, you have, basically what's an inherent contradiction here. You have, some jobs that just, we don't have enough people to fill in Canada. So we say, okay, well, we need to bring in all of these immigrants to fill those jobs. And then, oh, well, we don't have enough houses to house the immigrants. So we need to build more houses. Oh, we need to build more Okay, let's bring in more immigrants to build and it's this cycle that no one has really found an answer to yet.
Yeah. And this is a problem that exists in a lot of countries where you kind of have this almost imported labor for underclass. I've lived in different places, places like the Middle East, in Dubai, where you have basically a whole imported class of slave labor. I could call it nothing short of slave labor, indentured labor almost. And in a lot of other countries, it's the same thing. Canada, we've had a bit of that. We're seeing a lot more of it now. I think that's why it's attracting more attention. And a lot of cases, employers will say, well, we can't find Canadians to do the work. In some cases, they could by raising wages. That, of course, would lead to higher prices, and I think Canadians might not love that part. But part of it also is we don't talk about our entitlement system, right? Especially with seasonal workers in Atlantic Canada. Some employers, for example, have had a hard time trying to find people to work. That's why they import foreign labor. But that would, if we reformed our entitlement system in Canada, things like EI, you would remove that disincentive to work. So part of this is systemic too, and I think a lot of governments are just taking a shortcut. The easy thing to do is just say, oh yeah, we'll just kind of let people in through this channel and that solves the problem and it goes away. But as we can see now, it creates a whole different set of problems when it comes to discussing immigration.
Just on another note here, one of these issues that it's kind of like supply management in that you have like 9 people in Canada that really care about it from a policy perspective, but those 9 people really care about it, which is telecom regulation. And I would say more people should care about it because, it affects everyone, price of dairy, price of your phone plan.
Yeah.
I'm a Rogers customer. I am on a contract right now, so I think I'm a little bit safe, but anyone who's not on a contract is going to find an increase, which I know will affect me when it comes up for renewal. Here we have an issue in which the Conservatives previously tried to do a little bit with it. They tried to basically allow Verizon in, and you'd think it was though like we were being invaded by Germany. It was just like, how dare we let a foreign telecom company in? The Liberals say the right things. They say, well, yeah, competition we need, but they aren't doing anything, as you pointed out, to allow competition. What's going on here?
Yeah, look, and it's not just telecoms or supply management, it's banks, it's airlines. There's a raft of sectors in this country where the reason there's no was we don't allow it. We have rules around foreign investment and foreign ownership, and that is the reason for the lack of competition. So I say to people, you have to pick a lane. You can have on one side, if you absolutely insist that all these companies be headquartered in Canada, be owned by Canadians, by controlled by Canadians, you're not going to have enough competition. You're going to pay high prices for things like telecoms. The other alternative is you let in foreign competitors. You'll see more competition. You'll see price wars. You'll probably get better customer service to boot. The trade-off will be some of our companies will not survive. Some of our corporate giants, our titans, they are coddled. They are protected. They don't want competition, Andrew. They're afraid of it. And I made this remark elsewhere. When it comes to trade and business, anytime there's talk of a new trade deal or loosening restrictions, you see Canadian business divides into 2 camps. One camp is excited. They're ambitious. They say, you know what? I can go out there. I can take over the world. I can dominate. And then you have the other half, which are terrified. They do not want competition. They're afraid of global competition. Why? I want to know why our governments always side with the terrified group and never double down on the ambitious entrepreneurial group that see, competition as an opportunity and a challenge, not as an existential threat.
Yeah, and I think I remember you and I first met. I don't even know if you remember this, but it was a Fraser Institute student seminar, however many years ago, back when they used to do those, and they bring in a bunch of rambunctious young students to talk about policy. I don't know if they still do them, but they were great fun. And at the time, I was a bit of a rabble rouser, and I remember at university, I sat in through this one session that you all had to do if you were part of a club on campus. And the head of the club's program, as always, who's like a raging lefty, gave this big, long lecture about how we're not allowed to sell food as clubs because there are vendors on campus that sell food. And she used the line, and everyone knows competition makes prices go up. And I was like, I don't know if I could agree on that, but everyone, like, it's the opposite. I mean, even like raging Marxists, I think, concede that competition will, except for this one, will lower prices. They may say it's not good to do so, but no one can argue that competition wouldn't be better for consumers here.
No, but the problem that the government has from a stakeholder standpoint is it's not good for the incumbents, right? It's not good for Rogers and Bell, and Rogers. I mean, we see this over and over in other sectors. What they do is they start trying to spook the public with job losses, right? They say, oh, well, if we get a competitor in here, we're going to have to lay off all these people. And then governments don't want the bad headlines, so they back off. And of course, they never want to tell you the other half of that is that, someone else is going to be doing that job. I mean, when Walmart moved into Canada, that wasn't good for certain Canadian retailers that were the competitors, but a lot of people work at Walmart in Canada now. So they created jobs on the other side of the ledger. So, I think it's disingenuous. It's self-serving. Obviously, any business that's doing well wants to keep doing well, and they're going to pull all the levers they can, including trying to pressure governments into not allowing more competitors. I think as consumers, as voters, we need to be very, very aware about that. They're not looking out for our interests; they're looking out for their own self-interest. And really, if we're really interested in competition and lower prices, it shouldn't matter, which company is delivering that. What should matter is that consumers are getting lower prices and better service.
Yeah, and Telecom's probably a great example because everyone's had a terrible customer service experience with every one of the companies, and everyone's had at a certain point a call drop on every one of them. But they all claim to have like the fastest network, the largest network, so they're all the same. It's purely a matter of which one has your business at a particular point in time. And I think, anything that would change that, I would be all for. So an opportunity for the Conservatives, possibly. Aaron Wudrick, thank you so much as always, sir.
Thanks a lot, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.